Hey, herd watching audience. You may or may not have just seen me on my Modern Samurai vlog over at my other Facebook thing. I'll link it there. You can find those videos also at modernsamurai.io, mdrnsamurai.io. You can find a somewhat up-to-date version of these videos over at herd watching, HERDWAT CHING, herdwatching.com. And in any case, thanks for tuning in and watching this. So for those of you who sort of have been paying attention, herd watching tends to be long-form political discussion of topics of the day or philosophical questions that are on my mind. Now, we're going to be talking in depth on something. We're going to be talking about objectivism in the next couple of posts. But if you want a head start on that, if you jump back to my personal vlog, we've been talking about books that had an impact on me, and we talked about Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged and sort of how those things impacted my thoughts on individualism and so on. But for now, I want to take a couple seconds and let's talk about something that's really kind of in the news right now. And not whatever the latest panic about Trump is. I don't really care about that for the moment. What I want to do is talk about the framing around it. Let's talk about left-wing orthodoxy of thought. And this has been true for the left wing in a way that it was not necessarily true for the right wing, and has not been true for the right since maybe the early 70s. Even as far back as I can remember in the early 80s, when, you know, it was pretty axiomatic on the right that the Soviets were the evil empire and that Reagan was a god, and we were locked in this death struggle for the future of democracy. Even then, it was perfectly acceptable within the ranks of republicanism to diverge from that thought. And if you did, while you might be ridiculed or, you know, maybe not invited to all the cool parties, you were not treated to violence. There were not going to be groups of hundreds of right-wingers outside your door sort of violently demanding that you change your mind. Whereas even as far back as 1960, the early 1960s, the left, in the U.S. left, has used organized violence as a tool of political change. And there's a reason for this difference, and the reason is the Soviet Union. Back in the 50s, when the Soviets realized that they were not going to be able to overcome the U.S. militarily, they embarked on a sort of pattern of influencing left-wing thought in the United States. And at the time, we had a much more significant socialist, communist undertone than we do now as a nation. Politically, they influence those people into a much more active, agitative, and violent stance. So even if you look at the riots that centered around the Vietnam era 1960s riots, even as you're looking at some of the riots that surrounded the racial civil rights movements of the time, you'll find that the violence was basically being egged on not organically by the individual groups or even by the organizers of some of the names you might know, the civil rights leaders, the great black civil rights leaders of the time, that in fact the organized violence came from within the far left movement, but within the communist, socialist portions of that sort of masqueraded as anarchists. And even in the 70s and 80s, and then the emergence of something called the International Answer Coalition, A.M.S.WER, which is basically a front for communist-backed insurgency within the U.S., you'll find that there's always been this hard left ideological core that took any opportunity to push violence on the rest of them. And then it started to spread, because what they would do is they would teach the other portions of the left that these were the tactics of the revolution, that these were the only way you were going to get through an oppressive regime. So instead of seeing the United States as a democracy that they would participate in to make change, the left gradually became indoctrinated in this idea that they were fighting an oppressive fascist regime and that they would use the insurgent tactics of revolution as opposed to the democratic tactics of change. And you've always seen that. You've always seen a deep division in the left from the 1960s on, whereas at times the Democratic Party, which was functioning from within the system, the political system the United States possesses, that in fact they were considered the man in its own way, that they were sellouts, and that really the hard anarchistic left was the ones keeping the flame alive. And that was what gave rise for a long time to this idea that was really purely in the left, as opposed to from the right, that was like, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or Republican in charge, the big corporations own them both, and yada, yada, yada. Whereas from the right, we've always been completely comfortable in the democracy because we're very well aware of the fact that there are radical differences between us and the Democrats. I don't know anyone in the Republican Party who's ever said, it didn't really matter whether it was Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump who got in. It didn't really matter whether it was Reagan or his opponent. It didn't really matter whether it was Bush or Gore. It's all the same, corporate interest, the man, yada, yada, yada. It's not really been a conservative right Republican position. It has been a position of the core anarchist hard left that never went away from the civil rights. And if you look at the tactics the left has employed since that time, these are the tactics of the revolutionary insurgent, where they will attempt to, you know, be disruptive and civil disobedient and whatever. And civil disobedience is a watered down version of the terrorist tactic of forcing the hand of the larger society you're part on, so that you can then point to that as an overreach and accuse them of abuse. So if you chain yourself to the door of a government building, which is clearly an irrational act because you know we have to get through. We're not going to allow any random person who decides to chain themselves to an airport to hold up hundreds of thousands of people, but you will force the image of 5 security guards with bolt cutters, you know, surrounding this little old woman who's chained herself to this door. And then you will run around and go, 5 cops descended on a woman who was just exercising her civil disobedience. You're trying to force an incident. You're attempting to force a PR move. And that's exactly the tactics that terrorists employ. That's not to say that those tactics are terrorism. I want to be completely clear here. Look, to a degree, civil disobedience is well within what I consider to be free speech. I don't think you should shut down a highway. I think I'm going to drive through you. I think if you surround my vehicle and start pushing on it, you're no longer being civilly disobedient. That's an assault. But look, you want to chain yourself to the cop car so that we have to cut you off, or you want to go limp and chain yourself to 5 people so we got to drag you off in a group. Fine, whatever. You know, you're on the line, but that's I'm not planning on shooting you for that. What I'm saying is though you can, you know, understand that eventually we don't really care about whatever little PR point you're making. You're like, oh my God, they're dragging me away. Well, oh my God, you chained yourself together in groups of 5 or 10. So yeah, we dragged your ass away. You asked for it, we did it, deal with it. But those tactics are the same tactics of terror. In other words, if you're a terrorist and you have and every day a school bus gets to go through a border checkpoint, and every day it's full of school children, but every now and then you sneak your guy on board and you drive at the checkpoint and force with a bomb in it, eventually you're going to blow it up often enough that they're going to have a zero tolerance policy on buses not stopping where they stop. And we've used this example before, and then they're going to blow up a bus and you're going to go on TV and go, oh my God, they blew a bus of school children. But eventually people figure out that you're the one who forced that issue. And these are the tactics of civil disobedience. To a degree, it's the same idea. We're going to push and push and push and push and push. And when you react in the only way you can to preserve order in the face of our pushing, we will then yell overreach and scream about how you are abusing us. Those tactics it's not a shock that that's the same core Alinsky-style defined tactics in the American left and the socialist revolutions and the sort of pro-communist revolutions that we've seen around the world, because these are the tactics that were created and spread and sort of codified by the Soviets and pushed out into the world as a way to push back against capitalism, democracy, and whatever. And that is why, at least since the 1960s, political violence in the U.S. is almost entirely a tool of the moderate to far left. There is no right-wing equivalent. Even when we had the Tea Party, which was a bunch of, originalist, hardline, constitutionalist, open carry people who would get together in groups of thousands to march about the fact that they believed that the U.S. government was turning into a surveillance police state. These were people who actually legitimately were concerned about the overreach of government power and fascism, for good reason, by the way, because they were being investigated by the FBI and labeled as domestic terrorists, even though they never took a single act of terrorism. At their worst, with the exception of lone freakoids, but as a group, the closest thing you have to organized right-wing political violence is when 4 good old boys or 15 good old boys call themselves a militia and they go take over a forest ranger station in the middle of nowhere and demand that nobody show up, otherwise they're going to be mean to them and say bad words. You simply do not get hordes of hundreds of right-wing people smashing windows, destroying cars, flipping things over, burning things, occupying buildings and sending a mass. You didn't get it when we were protesting. You didn't get it when we were out of power. You didn't get it when we were in danger. It's simply not the way the right in the United States operates. And for the most part, across the globe, it's not the way the right operates. It's the left that gets together in their thousands every time the G8 meets and starts busting windows and freaking out and whatever. It's the left in Europe that typically organizes student riots, what they call protests. So I'm not here to debate whether the moderate right and the moderate left, who's right and who's wrong. That's whatever. I'm not here to debate the tactics. I'm not even talking about whether Trump was better than Obama. Put all that aside for a moment. When there's a couple hundred, tens of thousands of people get together and start breaking windows, if you're an intellectually honest human being, there's not one of you that says, oh my God, I wonder if those are Democrats or Republicans. They're Democrats. And when you see that orthodoxy of thought, when you see that these people are perfectly happy to be violent, now you understand why their internal threats hold water. They hold a ton of water. So, fast forward to the Grammys or whatever, if you dare to stay silent, if you are not an ardent Trump hater, if you're not virtue signaling and getting on Twitter every day, if you're a Hollywood actor and you're not getting on Twitter every day and talking about how much you hate Donald Trump, more and more stories emerge of the level of hatred and threat you get, even for being neutral. And that's the sign of an intellectual orthodoxy gone wild. You can't even hold your tongue. You have to actively sort of participate in proving to them that you are loyal, that you believe what they want you to believe, that you're one of the good guys. And you have to get up every morning and you have to go outside and you got to wave the anti-Trump flag. And if you don't say enough anti-Trump things this week, your friends start looking at you weird and you don't get invited to parties. And if you're in Hollywood, you don't get enough work. And then people start talking about you. And if you dare then have reasonable conversations with Republican friends, you get death threats. If you're a minority, you are called the worst racial things possible. And yes, of course, if you're a minority celebrity, you're going to get insane racist crap from the right wing. But yet, those people are not actively taking away your livelihood. Those people are not theoretically your friends. Those people are not theoretically people who know you better. I'm not saying that those threats don't mean anything. I'm just saying if you are on the left today, you know that if you were to get on Twitter and be like, you know what, I understand that I would have rather Hillary Clinton win, and that there's a lot of crazy stuff that I don't like about Donald Trump. But the average Republican is probably not a racist prick. And maybe Donald Trump didn't get elected just because people hate women. And see where that hate mail comes from. Which is why it's so hilarious to hear people call Meryl Streep brave. So Meryl Streep got up in front of a room full of friendly people who all hated Donald Trump, in an industry of people that hate Donald Trump, with her hundreds of millions of dollars in aggregate worth. And she said exactly what all of them demanded she say. And I'm supposed to consider her brave. Meanwhile, you know, if some poor bastard got up at the Grammys and said, you know what, I voted for Donald Trump and I think he's an okay human being, they would never work in Hollywood again. It would be the end of their lives. And you see this, and you see the left getting even harder about their orthodoxy. And that's why we're seeing more and more stories from people leaving the left, moderate, left-leaning people who do not agree with the conservatives about gay marriage and abortion and many of those things. They're still, you can be a pro-choice Republican, and you might have some heated arguments, but you are not going to be excommunicated from the Republican Party the way you will be excommunicated from the left if you're pro-life. So when you look around, you will see that one of these two groups has hardened right now in a way that brooks almost no real conversation. And if you're on the left, you know that. You know it. And I've had conversations with people who will say it. And I'm not going to name anybody, but if I had a nickel for every far left-leaning friend of mine who's like, I would not dare say this on my timeline, but you know what? Most of my Republican friends, I never hear them say that. They're like, I'm going to share this on my timeline, and some people might hate me and whatever, but, you know, we'll argue about it, but whatever. And that's not to say that there was never a time when Republican thought wasn't hardened. And that's not to say that the Republican Party and the right doesn't give you a lot of crap if you don't toe the line on certain things. I'm simply saying that the left has a level of intellectual orthodoxy coupled with a penchant for the belief of using violence as a tool of policy that makes it dramatically more dangerous to be out of lockstep with leftist thought right now than right. And as a person, if you are out of step with the left right now in our society, if you're a student, your grades will suffer. If you are an actor, you will not get work. If you're looking to be in government, you will not get work. If you are a corporation and you have to pick sides, you are far better off appealing to the left and to the right now. And that's changing. That's one of the things that Trump did. But so keep your eyes open to the people who are leaving the left. And if you're a moderate left-leaning person, I want you to take a good hard look at the people who really will not tolerate you asking questions. And then move to the side that does tolerate you asking questions. Because we are more than happy to be sort of manipulated on the right in a way that the left, you know, you have influence on the right because you can talk to us. Right now, the left won't even let you have a conversation. So you're in deep trouble. I got to pay a toll here, and then we're going to wrap this up in a minute. Anyway, that's kind of my thought. So I want you to take that into account, and there you go. Hey, you know, so keep that in mind. Thank you so much. And, you know, you guys have a great afternoon. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what your experience is. And I hope you guys have a fantastic afternoon. And we will talk again. Take it easy.